I'm at the foot of the Santa Cruz Mountains in San Mateo County at a place called the Woodside Store. This is California Historical Landmark number 93. It's an old hardware store and post office and saloon and community town center area that used to serve California's logging industry in the late 19th century, starting about 1854. The scene here today is idyllic, with these rustic 19th century buildings conveying something about California's past, the sheltering live oaks, and of course rising on the slopes behind me a forest of coast redwood trees. But today's idyllic scene covers up a past of environmental destruction that's almost unimaginable, a history of logging, the creation of a Redwood Empire, a lumbering empire in late 19th century California that provided the raw materials for the building of urban California, San Francisco, and other cities in the late part of the 19th century. I'd like to go up the slopes and take a look at what we can see about that history in the redwood forest itself. From here atop the Skyline Ridge, it's possible to get a sense of the range and the habitat of the coast redwood tree. In open spaces along Skyline Boulevard, you can look west out to the Pacific Ocean, and to the east you can see down and across the San Francisco Bay. It was in a narrow band of mountainous terrain along the California coast, from Carmel in the south to the southern parts of Oregon, where the coast redwood made and makes its home today. For thousands of years, California Native Americans made use of the resources of these forests, in particular using bark from the redwood trees for housing and many other resources. But the use and exploitation of these resources expanded with Spanish settlement and Mexican governmental administration, and then the arrival of Americans and the American conquest in the 19th century. This land here became part of the Rancho de las Pulgas, the Arguello Ranch, which was granted out to the Arguello family in the 1830s. And then with the gold rush and the arrival of tens of thousands of newcomers from all around the world, this became the scene of California's first timbering industry. Between 1854 and 1875, dozens of first water-powered and then steam-powered sawmills began to work in these hills, and by the end of the 19th century, the east-facing slopes of the Santa Cruz Mountains had been largely deforested, and their lumber, or their wood, crafted into lumber, and that lumber was shipped out of the San Francisco Bay to cities up and down the California coast, but also around the San Francisco Bay to form the basic building materials of the city of San Francisco. And then, in 1906, the earthquake shook the city, set it afire, and all of that redwood lumber went up in smoke, and it had to be done all over again. And the west side of the slopes of these mountains became the new scene of redwood logging. In all of that process, the entirety of the old-growth redwood forest of the northern Santa Cruz Mountains was cut down. All of the commercially viable redwood trees, except one, were cut. And that tree is behind me. This is Methuselah. And this tree is about 1,800 years old. It spans in its girth, even from this distance with it 10 feet behind me, you can see perhaps 15 to 18 feet in diameter. It's an 1,800-year-old tree. Its top has been blown off in a lightning event over 100 years ago, so it's only 150 feet high or so. But nonetheless, this monster of the forest gives a sense of what this forest looked like in the years before this became the center of the Redwood Empire. This tree, I think, gives us a window into the past. And for those Californians who love our redwood trees and our redwood forests, it's important to remember that those trees and forests that we enjoy today are largely second growth trees. In 2020, a massive lightning-induced fire swept the Santa Cruz Mountains, including the Big Basin State Park, which was until that time the home of the largest extant old-growth redwood grove in the Santa Cruz Mountains south of San Francisco. The early news out of Big Basin is not encouraging. It may be that many, if not most, of the old-growth grove there was destroyed in the fire. And so that means that this great tree, Methuselah, named after a biblical character who in the time of Noah supposedly lived to be 900 years old, may be the last living remnant of the great coast redwood forests that carpeted these mountains south of San Francisco for thousands of years. Methuselah to me is a reminder of a moment in California's history when the hunger for environmental resources was unrelenting and also unrestricted. But for me, it's also a calling card from the past that demands a more sustainable, equitable, and just approach to our environmental resources. And I think that it requires us to be better stewards of the landscape than Californians have been for the past 100 to 150 years. So I give you Methuselah and the Redwood Empire in the Santa Cruz Mountains.